So every year, NSU at UCLA takes part in the Manzanar pilgrimage, as well as the Manzanar After Dusk, which is a program after the pilgrimage. It's a time to hear the internee stories, as well as those attendees interact in small group discussions. So with that being said, how is NSU's past involvement in this Manzanar pilgrimage important, and what is the significance of our activities such as Manzanar After Dusk? And kind of linking into Tule Lake, does Tule Lake have something similar to that? And should students be involved in the Tule Lake and Manzanar Committee? So if it could be like more of a discussion type of thing.
Do you want to do the Manzanar part first? Or?
Sure. We actually stole it from Tule Lake. So it was they have an intergeneration, which component to their pilgrimage, which Barbara can talk about. But yeah, so we actually lifted the idea of having an intergenerational component to the pilgrimage, and as you guys noted earlier, that there are fewer and fewer former incarcerees at the pilgrimage, and so it is getting a little bit, it's more difficult to get those direct stories. But Gan Matsuda, who's sitting right here in the front, has been the principal organizer of Manzanar After Dusk for many years. So if you guys want more details, you can talk to Gan about it. But it's, I think, one of the most important components of the pilgrimage, because it allows an exploration of what actually occurred in an individual way, but also really a much more intimate setting for people to draw out some of the lessons of what happened at camp. Ken Burns did a short film about the pilgrimages when he did his bigger series on the national parks, and some of the best footage actually is from that, because it's so powerful when the younger generations are right there with the Nisei. They're no longer any Issei that I know, but the Nisei that were in camp. It's really pretty powerful. So I think it's one of the best things. And this past one, they actually reenacted some of the stories of people who survived camp. And that was, you thought, well, here's some 18-year, 19, 20-year-old. It was very effective. It was very powerful. And I think for, I'm Sansei, but it was still very powerful to watch the younger generation portray what people had gone through, and it was quite effective. There's hundreds of people who go to that. There's, what was Gan, where we had about 400?
About 360.
360, and I think at one point we had over 400 people come from MAD. So it's still a very central component, and I think very effective tool.
Stands the institutional memory of the Tule Lake pilgrimage, so maybe you can talk about the way the format evolved. Tule Lake.
Yeah, when we started Tule Lake pilgrimage started about 1975. I didn't get to Berkeley until 78, so I missed the first couple. But at that time, we were taking about 300 people up to the Tule Lake campsite, which is way northern California, very close to the Oregon border. And out of the 300 people, I would guess maybe 5 were Nisei. Everyone else was students, and so there wasn't a lot of first-hand knowledge. It was kind of limited. But starting in the early 80s, basically after the commission hearings, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, after those hearings happened in 81, there was a real opening up among the Nisei in particular, of being willing and able at that point to share their stories. And so we started seeing more Nisei, and in 82 and 84 we actually had 10 or 15 Issei come and join us. And one of the people who was involved at the time, Stephanie Miyashiro, had a very firm conviction that the pilgrimage was not just about learning history, and it wasn't just about seeking artifacts and looking at ruins. For her, the central core of what the whole pilgrimage, the concept of a pilgrimage was about, was a healing process for the community. That there had been this great damage to the community as a whole and individuals as a person, and that the healing had never happened, and that in order to help with the healing of ourselves and our community that we needed to start actually talking about what had happened and how did it affect us. And her idea was you couldn't do that in a big setting with 300 people. And for one, it would take too much time to have 50 or 60 people come up and talk. So we decided to split into small groups, no more than 15, maybe 17 people, and we wanted it intergenerational. So it wasn't just all the Nisei gathering together in one group and all the Sansei in another group, but they wanted it intergenerational. And so we set it up that way, and it's been continuing since the mid-'80s, every pilgrimage. And for many of us, we feel that it is kind of the core of what the Tule Lake pilgrimage is about, is those intergenerational discussion groups where people can talk about what happened, how it made them feel, how it affected their families, how it continues to affect families. And for those of us who weren't born yet, how did we find out about it? How do we feel about it? How did it affect our lives? And I think that's a key thing.
One thing I might add, well, how many people in the room have been on a Tule Lake pilgrimage? Yeah, it's quite a few. And one thing that's very different about the Tule Lake pilgrimage is that it's now a 4-day event. And we travel together on the buses. The buses, in a sense, form communities. And, we were spending 4 days together. Processing, sharing stories, kind of getting to know people. And I think this is the thing about the Tule Lake pilgrimage that is so powerful. When you're traveling together, you're eating your meals together, you're living together in the dorms, and going and visiting the site together, there's a lot of sharing that goes on. And I think that is one of the very powerful parts of the Tule Lake pilgrimage experience. The problem is that we can't accommodate the number of people that you do at the Manzanar pilgrimage, which is usually over 1,000 people, right? And so I guess that's the thing that we're looking at in the future, is trying to figure out ways to accommodate more people. Because the healing process continues. I mean, one of the things that we're working on in Tule Lake in the last decade is the issue of community healing. Because there has been a divide in our community, and it was created by the government. The government essentially defined us as either loyal or disloyal. And the so-called disloyal people, which those were all the people who were the civil rights advocates. They were the organizers. They were the ones who were the outspoken ones. That 10% of the community was the group of people that was segregated to Tule Lake, which became a high security concentration camp. It was a very repressive place. There was martial law. Tule Lake is the only site that has a stockade and a jail. There was a jail in Tule Lake to imprison all of the dissidents. And all of those people who were protesters were defined as troublemakers, as the bad people, the bad apples. And Japanese Americans have there has been this internalization of the way, looking at the Japanese American incarceration story, and that a lot of the way that the story is looked at is from the point of view of the guards, of those who imprison Japanese Americans, rather than from the point of view of the prisoners. So the next generation, I hope, will look at the Tule Lake story and all of the other protest stories that took place during the war, and realize that the people who have been labeled as disloyal were probably the ones who felt the most passion about passionate about the injustice that was done.
Thank you very much. I guess I didn't really know too much about the Tule Lake pilgrimage and kind of how it linked to the Manzanar pilgrimage, so it's really interesting. I really feel the passion that you guys have towards these pilgrimages, like just from hearing you guys. But so now I guess we'll move on to our next question, presented by you.
Hello, my name is Yuta Ibikawa. I'm also from the UCLA Nikkei Student Union. And the question I would like to ask is that how can we create a connection between the legacy of the camps and those who didn't have family members who were unaffected, such as Shin Nisei or the new Issei, Shin Nisei, the new Nisei, or the Asian Pacific Islander communities, and even the multiracial communities. And yeah, that's my question.
Well, I feel that the story of wartime incarceration is such a powerful story of the violation of civil rights, and that all Americans should care about this story. And that those of us who have family members who have experienced it have the opportunity to, we have that personal connection to share that story and to find ways to connect the Japanese American story to other stories and other incidents and events of social justice. I think one of the worst parts of the experience for our family members was that sense of isolation, that when they were removed, the feeling that nobody really cared, that nobody really reached out. The only groups that reached out were the Quakers. And that in hindsight, we can look back and see the terrible pain that the isolation caused. And perhaps we'll be in a better position to respond to others who experience similar kinds of injustice.
So I think it's an interesting question that often comes up is, if I wasn't involved, why should I care? If it wasn't my family, why should I care? It reminds me of a saying of, if people of good conscience do not act when they see evil, then evil will prevail. And that's something that we should all take to heart. I work in healthcare, so I like to use analogies. So I don't know if many of you were reading recently, there was an outbreak of Listeria bacteria in the cantaloupe industry. And I think several dozen people got sick and actually died. Several hundred got hospitalized. So you could say, I don't eat cantaloupes, I don't like cantaloupes, so it doesn't really concern me. And that might be true, but maybe your mother or your brother or your daughter does eat cantaloupes and they get sick and they die. Then it does concern you. But if you've waited until they're in the hospital, then it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it at that point. Similarly, we could say that, it was Japanese that were locked up. It doesn't concern me. I'm Chinese, or I'm Muslim, or I'm Irish, or I'm gay or lesbian. But in a society where you can still have prejudice, where you can still be identified on some basis, and who knows what the basis will be. If someone isn't there watching, and if everybody isn't there watching, saying that you have rights as an American citizen, you have rights as a human being, and they were willing to back it up, then those rights can be taken away under certain circumstances. Wartime hysteria, people are afraid, people are under attack. If someone comes up with some crazy idea, let's lock them all up, and no one is willing or able or thinking about it enough to say, no, that's not right, then it could happen again. And right now we can say, oh, it's not me. But if you wait long enough, this might be you.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. I think my mother made an observation early on in the 70s that it was actually NHK television, the Japanese national TV, that was coming to every pilgrimage, and she was actually admonishing a U.S. news company. I can't remember, I was a kid, but the company was filming, and my mother was lecturing the media, saying, this is absurd. This happened here. I'm an American citizen, having a U.S. citizens, yet the NHK is here. And I don't know if you guys have seen this 99 Years of Love series, which I think is actually pretty well done. It's a soap opera, but it's pretty well done, and it depicts the historical evolution of this one family. And there were some Bainbridge Islanders, Washington State residents that did end up at Manzanar. And they called us and wanted to verify that. And so we talked to the producers for a while about some of the historical components of that series. But I think it makes me a little more optimistic. I guess I feel optimistic that there are links, that there is a historical bond that exists that shouldn't be overlooked and actually should be fought for. And I think it gets to what Barbara and Stan were saying, which is that we do have this unique place. Our community has a unique place in American history. Maybe you can say Native Americans also do too, because reservations in many ways were concentration camps. But our community, as a whole, not just those that were in camp, has a special responsibility to ensure that this country, the broader public, understands what happened on its soil, understands how far the government went to violate our Constitution, and understands the impact, the profound economic, psychological, social dislocation that this act, how it impacted an entire community. And I think it's important to grasp, because it's not simply that Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. There was a lot of anti-Asian and anti-Japanese racism that existed in California for many years leading up to this. And there was a lot of agitation right before the war, and in fact during the war, where there were journalists openly advocating seizing all the economic assets of the Japanese community. And so you've got to look at the totality of the thing. It wasn't simply just, oh, well, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, so let's round up the Nikkei community. There were a lot of other components that went into it, some of which were just economic in nature. So I think we occupy a special place in history and in this country, and it is incumbent upon, actually it's our responsibility to continue to educate and continue to bring up the issues of constitutional rights. So, it's amazing. I mean, in the 70s, there was a Chinese guy in a bar was beaten to death. Vincent Chin was beaten to death in Detroit because the guys thought he was Japanese, because they claimed to be unemployed auto workers. But this is not ancient history. This is not a question, in my mind at least, of something that occurred, and it's just a historic, like you're describing the need for the intergenerational. This is an ongoing issue that can erupt at any given time. Right now, Japan and the United States are very close politically, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of tension. But to say that there isn't anti-Asian racism in this country, or racism in general, to me is kind of ridiculous on its face. But I think the question of how we continue to organize and continue to raise these issues using history, using our history to illuminate that, I think is really important. So, and I think that's why, regardless of whether it's Shin, Issei, or Nisei, it's a question of, you have a historical link to this episode and to this community.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like me myself, I'm a Shin Nisei too, and like I learned so much about like the Japanese American history, like by attending university here and coming out to the greater Los Angeles, LA community, and I feel like it is my responsibility as a Japanese American to really like tell about what happened in the past and really like try and tell everybody so that nobody will make any mistake ever again.